There are many mysterious places in our world, from North Korea's Bureau 39 to Antarctica's Blood Falls to your parents' bedroom. But more interesting than all of these is the enduring mystery of the Amber Room. Once called the eighth wonder of the world, its story involves many of the great empires from history, a ridiculous story of ridiculous people, climaxing with the total disappearance of the entire room, vanishing without a trace. Like all great stories, this one begins with a war. It was the late 17th century and Sweden was the most feared country in Europe. I know that might sound hard to believe, but in those days they were less into building furniture and more into religious extremism. Generations of expansion had made Sweden a great empire and the preeminent power in Northern Europe. Russia, on the other hand, was feared by no one. Far from the giant it would eventually become, Russia was backwards, isolated from the rest of Europe and had no access to the Baltic Sea, and yet they were the closest thing Sweden had to a rival in that region. So when the German state Prussia was trying to put together an anti-Swedish war coalition, they were desperate to keep the Russians on board. To do so, King Frederick was willing to give up his most prized possession, the Amber Room. Years before, Peter the Great had been on a visit to Berlin Palace, when he found himself inside a mysterious room. Unlike anything he'd ever seen, its walls were beautified with panels of amber, carved and crafted into all kinds of intricate designs, crowned with a wealth of gold and gemstones. Few people could have ever afforded such a creation, and in modern terms it's worth more than $500 million US. 6 tons of pure amber went into making the room over a 10-year period. It was a ridiculous expense, and a ridiculous thing to just give away. But desperate times call for desperate measures, and in the year 1716 the entire room was taken apart and transported to Russia. Its new home would be St. Petersburg, a new city established by Peter the Great himself. More specifically, it was in Catherine Palace, where a team of Russian and Prussian craftsmen tirelessly worked to install the Amber Room. For more than a century it remained here, as the Jewel of St. Petersburg. Meanwhile, Russia evolved into a great empire and devolved into the Soviet Union. Then in 1941 there was a minor diplomatic dispute between Germany and the Soviets. It was only a small conflict, so you've probably never heard of this, but Germany actually ended up invading. This came as such a shock to the Soviets they had no time to disassemble the Amber Room for safekeeping. So as the Germans took St. Petersburg, the room's interior was simply covered up by wallpaper. If we're being honest, this Scooby-Doo level deception was never going to work, and before long the Amber Room was stripped of its precious panels. This was part of a campaign of looting which saw many of Europe's great treasures stolen and taken back to Germany. By mid-October, the panels had arrived in Königsberg Castle, and by November the Amber Room had been reassembled. Here it stood for much of the war, just one example of German plunder in those years. There was even an official looting organization, which under the leadership of Hermann Göring, stole more than 21,000 items across Europe. But spoiler alert, the Germans lost the war. Going into 1945, Königsberg was constantly under attack by Allied bombing runs, causing many of its treasures to be packed up and evacuated. They had to move quickly though, as the castle was soon bombed into a ruinous state. This is where the mystery begins. We know plans were made to evacuate the Amber Room, but the man in charge of carrying this out had a breakdown and went AWOL. So there's a chance nobody else even bothered to move it. For all we know, the most valuable room on Earth might simply have been bombed into not existing. On the other hand, the Amber Room would have been a priority for the Nazis, and it would not be the only piece of loot buried in secret. A main theory is that it was evacuated aboard the ship Wilhelm Gustloff, a ship that would soon be struck and sank by a Soviet torpedo. So another option is that it remains at the bottom of the sea. Many lines of inquiry were investigated by the Soviets, who understandably wanted their shiny boy room back. In the end, they concluded that it was lost in the bombing, and in 1979 construction began on a new Amber Room in Russia. The project took 24 long years, and the hard work of dozens of Soviet and German craftsmen, officially being opened in 2003. Yet there are many out there today who believe the original Amber Room is still out there, hidden and waiting to be found.